Welcome, everybody. I'm Walter Isaacson, and it's my great pleasure to have this evening, as part of the McCluskey Speaker Series, Ev Williams. Ev is one of the amazing pioneers. Jerry Murdoch introduced me to him, so I'll give a shout out to Jerry. He's one of the amazing pioneers of the internet and really has been responsible for, I think, three of the most important advances. One was called Blogger, because even though we think blogging is this huge thing, it used to be almost too difficult for a normal person to blog. And one day he said, wait, I just want to be able to type it in a box and put publish. And boom, all of a sudden, we could all be bloggers. Then he went on to co-found Twitter, which was both a social network and a micro-blogging platform. And then having done that, went on to create something that has been very important to me, which is Medium, which is a cross between a publishing platform and a collaboration platform. And so if we ever want to know the future of the internet, the best way to do it is say, Ev, what are you working on now? So I want to welcome Ev Williams.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm going to do something a little bit different than we usually do in the interviews, is I want to make this a bit biographical, because in understanding how we do innovation and creativity, it was interesting for me to study what motivated and how Ev's mind worked. So let's start as a kid in Clarks, Nebraska, was it?
It was. Yes.
And there are more people
Metropolis.
in this room than there were in Clarks, Nebraska. 372, I looked it up, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what did that do for you in terms of wanting to make you connect to the outside world?
Well, of course, that was 372 in town. I lived outside of town. There was about 5 of us, but several cattle, and it's hard to say exactly what made us who we were, but I felt growing up that though I'm proud to have been from Nebraska, and I think it taught me a lot of important things. At the time, I felt like I just wanted to get out. And
what was your connection to the outside world? Do you have magazines? Or?
Yeah, I think it was media, really. We didn't travel very much, and at some point in junior high or high school, I discovered I was into different things, always things that no one else around me was into, like skateboards and bikes, and then cars, and I found magazines so I subscribed to a bunch of magazines, and I started reading books, and I never read books for school, but I always read books outside of school, and it just occurred to me, with books especially, I can tap the brains of these people with incredible knowledge and experience, and in a matter of hours learn what they've learned in years, and that was my vehicle for learning about and the outside world, as well as ways that I might actually get to the outside world.
And you get to the University of Nebraska and sort of discover computers at that point too, right?
Right, although I actually, in Clarks, Nebraska, there was a mandatory programming class for sophomores, and that was, so my dad had a computer before that on the farm. He was a fairly early adopter in a fairly large farm, so he bought an IBM, whatever it was, and I really wanted to do stuff with that, and I read the whole manual, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't program it, and then as a sophomore in high school, we had Apple IIs and mandatory programming, basic programming, and it blew my mind, and I just thought that, and I had a knack for it, and the teacher wasn't really that into it. Teacher/football coach was like, yeah, here's, and I ended up teaching half the class, and like went way over and beyond with my assignment, the final assignment, and I was so proud of it, and he knew I was going to get an A anyway, so he didn't look at it, but I decided, and then I would program in the computer room, and the school would shut down. I would just be there, and I'd look up, and all the lights were off in the school, and the school was locked. And I thought, this is what I want to do. These computers are cool. And so that was my first introduction. Unfortunately, I didn't follow that up with much, because I didn't then have access to either the computers I could program or other people who knew or cared about this stuff. So I didn't program again until a few years later.
You know, then you end up in San Francisco. You're working for a small company you founded, I think called Pyra Labs, is that it?
Pyra.
Pyra Labs. And one of the rules of innovation is stay focused. And you were maybe a bit unfocused. And you kept inventing little things on your left hand. You had a partner who said, no, we can't do this.
Right. So we were working at Pyra. Our idea was online collaboration, really, but in a productivity sense. So project management, to-dos, and I had, around the time, this was 1999, we started that company. And, excuse me, blogs, or weblogs as everyone called them at the time, everyone being the 16 people who knew what they were. You know, Dave Weiner, really a pioneer there. So I had a personal website since 1996 or something, and blogging was just sort of emerging around 98, 99 as this format, which was hard to describe, but it was sort of like, oh, okay, you have these discrete posts. Instead of just having a personal homepage, there are these posts, and they're chronological. And so I turned my own site into a blog, and it occurred to me, it was like, you could make a product to do this, but we're working on this serious thing, which is helping people be more productive. And so, yeah, I suggested we make a product called Blogger that helps people do this. And right, my co-founder very sensibly said, well, we're 3 people, and we have one product. We can't really start another product. And so when she was out of town, the other guy and I built Blogger and launched it.
And she quit.
Eventually, yeah. Well, we ran out of money. She actually then, more sensibly again, she and my other almost co-founder Paul they realized that Blogger was really the thing. And I was like, well, but this other thing is cool too, so we can do both things. So yes, it was a problem of focus. And they were like, we should really do Blogger, which eventually I came around to, but then we ran out of money, and everyone went away
yeah,
but me.
But it's like 2000, not a good time to be running a company. Right. You run out of money totally. You also had a attribute of just pure grit and persistence. Everybody else leaves, and I think you write a post called "And Then There Was One."
Right. Yeah, so we lived fairly publicly as a company, as much as one did at the time, because we were never large. We raised $500,000, which was all the money I could ever imagine needing to do anything. And so we raised that in early 2000, actually. Technically after the stock market started to crash, and we were only about 6 people, and everyone was blogging. We had this community who knew us, and that my post there, and then there was one was when everyone left, and I had tried to convince them. I remember meeting with my whole team and saying, well, we can't pay you anymore, but I'm going to keep working, so I invite you to keep working as well. And they're like, no, thank you. But the great thing then was all my costs went away, and so I kept working.
And so Blogger ends up getting bought by
Google 2 years later. Yeah.
And then how did you end up forming Twitter? What was the idea? I mean, well, first of all, Blogger is sort of a publishing platform, but you discover there's a community aspect to it, and that helps lead into Twitter.
Well, sort of. There was a big thing we didn't understand when we did Blogger that we understand today, which is the power of the internet is really about the network, and
meaning community, people connecting.
It's the interaction, it's the back and forth. It's I do something and causes you to do something and causes more people to do something. And there's all kinds of mechanisms and mechanics to that. And Blogger was really a tool to build websites. And because our understanding, I was always attracted to the idea that anyone could have their say and put their thoughts out there, and the good ones would be found, and you'd find your audience. But our understanding, as well as everyone else's around that time, was, well, that the default is it's a website, and that's how you put your stuff out there. And so when we got where was I? What was your question?
Well, it was about the question. I think the original sin when a lot of people create websites, including us at Time Inc., was we looked at it as a publishing medium, and we forgot that the internet is essentially a community connection medium.
Well, I think we didn't know that enough. The very beginnings of the internet, of course, that's what it was all about. And then we saw it as a publishing medium. We saw it as a very, like I said, a very cheap and fast way to publish. And that was powerful, but it overlooked something very important and more powerful. And so when Twitter came along, we thought the big thing was we were focusing on SMS and text messages at the time, which is why we made tweets very small. And we thought that was the main distinction between what we'd done before. But I think the much bigger distinction was it was a network. It had the distribution. So when you said something on Twitter, it immediately went to a bunch of people, assuming you had followers. Whereas Blogger, didn't matter how much you had done before. That was when you hit publish, really nothing happened except there's a web page now. And then maybe Google finds you, or maybe you email people, but it was much slower. So there was no plumbing really between the act of putting the thought out there and it reaching other people.
So you found Twitter with Biz Stone, Jack, other people, but you're the sort of the visionary founder of it. What did you think?
They're all visionary founders. We're all visionary founders.
Actually, Biz says that too, yeah. What were you thinking? I mean, what was the point of it?
It seemed cool. Twitter was a side project of another company I was running that didn't go as well, called Odeo. And the germ of the idea started with something Jack had been thinking about for a long time, which was a status update network. And it was also around the time, this was 2006, early 2006, that text messaging, believe it or not, wasn't really mainstream in the US yet at that time. It was in Europe. And so the networks had just been connected. So if you're on Verizon, you could text someone on AT&T. And so we saw mobile coming, but there weren't iPhones. You could develop Java apps for flip phones. And we saw SMS as a way to do a product that was mobile, but that we didn't have to write these crappy mobile apps for. And so we had been experimenting with SMS at Odeo, and Jack had this status idea, and we put the two together really and said, well, so you send a text message and it goes to a bunch of people instead of one person, was really the whole idea. And it took us a while to figure out what that really meant, but it turned out to be a good idea.
What did that really mean?
Actually, I like Ed Catmull's quote earlier about, he said, a movie is not an idea, it's literally tens of thousands of decisions and ideas, and so are many of the best products. And I think that was so well put, because it's not one idea. It was many ideas. One was using SMS, and one was how the follow model worked, which is now a standard. You sign up for all kinds of things, there's follow. We debated the word follow. No one had ever used the word follow. It's like, does that sound creepy that you're following people? Yeah. We had a joke that we could, before we named the product, one of the jokes that we weren't really going to name it was Friend Stalker.
Yes, right.
So anyway, there were lots of ideas, and we had to figure out the right combination of them that would actually make it work, and that took months. We launched it in March 2006 to some friends, and it was immediately fun with some friends, but it didn't grow. We made it public, I think, in June or July that year. It really didn't grow for many months, and we had to find the right combination of factors to make it work.
And initially, it seemed to be most people used it to sort of say, I'm eating breakfast now, or I'm at the gym now.
Yeah.
How does it suddenly evolve into becoming something bigger?
Right. So because the way we positioned it was as a status update. And we didn't even know this at the time, but Facebook had status updates, but we were too old to use Facebook because we weren't in school. But Facebook had this, what they still call it status update, I think, but it was, the way it worked was it'd be Walter Isaacson is, and then you'd put in your status update. So, and we had the similar idea. So it was just about like telling people what you're doing right now. And then people, like a lot of things, people started using it differently. And that helped teach us what it could do. And then this term microblogging came along, and it was somewhat ironic because as the blogger person, I didn't like blogging. It's not blogging. That's some different thing. And that sounds small, but I think that was an apt term because it was really more about broadcast and sharing information. In 2000, so the question at the top of the Twitter interface for years, or the first couple of years, was, "What are you doing?" And so people would say, "I'm eating breakfast. I'm having a delicious taco." Not for breakfast. That's more of a lunch post. But and then it occurred to us in, I think it was 2008, mid 2008, that it's not purely a social product. Part of what it is about is what you're doing or what your friends are doing, but it's really about what's happening. And that could be, I'm eating this delicious taco. It could be there's a fire in, and we saw even early on when there were wildfires in Southern California, we saw the LA Fire Department using it, and wow, well that's really meaningful and a completely different thing. It's sort of a status update, but it's really important real-time information. So that became what we optimized for.
One of the great old science fiction writers, a neuromancer, has a wonderful line saying, "The street finds its own uses for things," meaning you invent something and then you have no idea how it's going to be used. Were you sort of watching how people were using it and saying, "Oh, I get it, it's being used for something different, so we have to change and follow our followers," so to speak?
Yes, totally. And it wasn't, Twitter somewhat famously was a lot of the features were invented by users. Totally true that people's use of it taught us what it was. We also had to interpret which uses that we wanted to optimize for and then build the right product to enable
Give me an
that.
example of where you didn't decide to optimize for it.
Well, one of the controversial decisions early on was, so users invented the syntax of the @reply, which was simply a way to say, start a tweet with an @ symbol and then a username, which indicated that I'm talking to you. And
so you'd say @Jerry Murdoch, and it would actually go directly to him.
Well, it didn't at first. At first, it was just another tweet, but you could see it say, "I'm talking to Jerry" there. And then so we said, well, if you say @Jerry Murdoch, then let's make it that link to Jerry. But then we made it so one controversial decision was, I'm just gonna try to stay out of the weeds on this, but so if I said something to Jerry and you're following me but not Jerry, you probably don't want to see that.
Right.
Except some people do. So some people thought of Twitter as this kind of a party, just a chattery social network type thing. Did want to see all that noise and the personal responses, and other people who saw it more as this needs to be relevant information saw that as noise. And so we had to decide, you know what, it's really about, we want to keep the signal higher. Believe it or not, we want to keep the signal noise on Twitter high. And so we made a decision, like, if you're not following Jerry and I say, "Hey, Jerry," then you don't see that.
But your signal to noise ratio, with all due respect, is not great these days.
Yeah, that's why, yeah. Well.
And if you were in charge, it would be. So how would you make it great?
Well, the company's been doing things recently that are, for the first time, Twitter's always been about liveness. This is happening right now. And it has this amazing ability to distribute information faster than probably anything we've seen before at a mass scale, which is super powerful and fairly unique. The drawback of that is it's fairly random. If you pull out Twitter and say, well, what's happening right now, you get what someone's having for breakfast, but 20 tweets down is actually something really important, and it happened 10 minutes ago, and now it's not at the top of your feed. And so now at scale, there's 500 million tweets a day, I think, last I heard. It's probably more than that. What Twitter should really be doing is giving you what's most important every time you check it, which means it has to evolve beyond the purely, this is the very latest thing. And it's actually doing that. So there's a new feature called While You're Away. It's not done yet.
But you know what Twitter doesn't do, and I'm wondering if it could? It doesn't learn what I'm interested in because I don't click on things and like them, so it just keeps giving me the same feed.
Well, I don't run that company.
And if you did, what would you do? How would you make it a news?
There's lots of super smart technologists there who are working on that very problem, I'm sure.
And you sort of also made it, in some ways, it's a news service now. Was that intentional? I mean, I no longer go to try to find when you're eating a taco.
Yeah.
I try to find, wow, what just happened in Charleston?
Yeah, I mean, that was the insight we realized that it's not necessarily about the status update, it's about what's happening. And part of that is there's this big thing happening in the world, and part of it, there's something happening near me, and there's something happening as a person I care about. I think it's the ultimate news service.
Right.
And as we talked about on stage earlier, it could be a better organized news service. And there's tons of potential to do that, but that's the way I think about it.
What is the role of human curation?
On Twitter, or are we talking
Well, I
beyond?
mean, I go to the New York Times because it's curated by, Dean Baquet, whoever the editor is. Twitter has some features that you're now experimenting, I think, a little bit with. That's public information that involves...
Yeah, they're not launched yet, but there's some talk about a feature coming up that will be more curated.
Mm-hmm. But in the general future, the notion of a Google News all done by algorithm versus a newspaper or a site where real human beings curate it, what do you think is the future?
I think it's not at all either or, and they're not even meaning that it's both. It's everything is on a spectrum, because even Google, which is like the ultimate algorithm, is actually an aggregation of choices made by humans. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you're really saying when you say that is how many humans are collaborating on the choice of the information hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And in New York Times, it's maybe 1 or it's 10. Actually, I had the opportunity to go to the front page meeting at the Times a while back.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And there's one guy who is calling the shots, but there's arguments and opinions. And so there's a few people who are collaborating on that decision. And Google, it's thousands of people. It's anyone who makes a web page actually does collaborate, but it's not purely the computer. And on things like Twitter, the while you're away is actually a collaboration of the people who you follow saying, of all the tweets that you haven't seen, these ones, some people said are more important, is essentially. So it's the algorithm determining what determines whether they said is more important. Is it faves? Is that more important than a retweet? Or is it your affiliation with those people? So I think all of these things so there's an app called Nuzzle that was very interesting, where it simply tells you the most shared links among people you follow. And so is that an algorithm or is that curation? It's curation where you choose the curators.
Mm-hmm. We were talking on this stage with Reid Hoffman, and you were actually in the audience a couple nights ago. Yeah, and there was a bit of a discussion where Reid was saying one problem with the internet now is there's too much anonymity. Twitter is a big font of anonymity where people can say whatever they want without being responsible. It sometimes leads to cyberbullying. How would you calibrate being responsible for your own words and the freedom to be anonymous?
So first I would say there's not that much anonymity on Twitter. The vast majority of people operate under their own name, and they build profiles, and you build influence on Twitter and most of these networks over time. So most people aren't super reckless about that. However, that system and most internet systems there is a vector by which people can be abusive and not super helpful. And Twitter very recently has really upped our efforts to reduce the cost of that, while at the same time believing the role of people being able to speak freely with safety is actually a super important part of the service. And the history of Twitter and what it's done, especially in other countries with the oppressive regimes, has signaled that there's great value in people, especially being able to organize and to say what's happening without attaching their real name to it in areas where it can be very, very dangerous. And so we believe that strongly. We believe the power of Twitter, we've always been on sort of far side of freedom of speech is something we will withhold. And a lot of companies make legitimate choices that are on different parts of the spectrum. And I don't necessarily believe requiring people, I think way more harm than good would be done if we required everybody to use their own name in order to publish. Also, I believe with better systems similar to the curation question, a combination of crowdsourcing and algorithms can actually significantly lower the harm of abusers.
Your final product, or at least your latest
Done.
product, is Medium. And in some ways, it combines everything you've learned from Blogger with everything you learned from Twitter, and may end up being the most influential of anything you've created, because it's a whole new way of both publishing and collaborating. Explain how you came up with the idea and where you're going with it.
Sure. So Medium is a little bit a combination of both, as you say, in that it okay, so I'll back up to, I started Medium about 3 years ago, and I thought about it long and hard before doing it. When I stepped away from Twitter day to day in early 2011, immediately occurred to me that there's an opportunity for another publishing platform, and I had all kinds of ideas about what could be built. And I looked at blogging tools, and it felt like they hadn't really evolved in 10 years, and just bringing them into the modern age in terms of the interfaces and the experience seemed like a clear opportunity. But I hesitated for a couple reasons. One is that I wasn't ready to dive into building another product. And two was, I thought, well, this is all I've ever done. Do I really, maybe I'm just thinking about this publishing platform because I don't know how to think about anything else. So after a few months, I couldn't get this idea in my head, and the reason I felt like it was worth doing and still important wasn't because it was different than motivations that drove me with Blogger and Twitter. So with those products, our ethos was always there's value in getting more voices out in the world, more people sharing their thoughts. And yes, from the beginning of Blogger and always from Twitter, there was the critique was, yeah, but a lot of people don't have valuable things to say. And that's fine. And our goal was always, but there is incredibly valuable stuff and we can't be, the power of the internet is to open it up so everybody has an opportunity. And come 2012, we realized, well, we can check that box. That's a huge thing. We take it for granted today, but it's actually incredible that the 2 or 3 billion people who are connected to the internet can actually put thoughts into the world that can be accessed by a global population. And they can do it for free, and they can do it instantly. So what do we do next? Because unlike in 20 years ago when I learned about the internet and being the farm boy from Nebraska, I realized it doesn't instantly make us all smarter as society and individual, the fact that all this information is out there. In fact, it's sort of questionable. It's a little bit, it seems like it's easier to manipulate media and perception than ever because people have so much information to deal with. It's also the case that what gets paid attention to isn't necessarily that is the most valuable thing. That's clearly the feedback loops on the internet have not necessarily driven quality or substance or truth. And it seemed like the internet can do more than just lower the cost of distribution and increase the speed of distribution of information. So we set about to build a system that would actually assume that, yes, and everybody can publish, and we still hold that as a core ideal, that great ideas and valuable perspectives can come from anyone, but let's make it better. Let's make a system where the feedback loops actually reward quality and thoughtfulness, and let's make it so people can work on things together that are greater than they can do on their own. And let's explore how to publish things or share things that evolve over time and things that evolve beyond the print model, which has basically been, it hasn't evolved that much since the beginning of blogging. It's you put words on a page and you move them down and you never change them. They never get updated. You don't necessarily get that much intelligence from the network. There's so many things to do to still drive toward that goal of making us smarter and better, because we can share knowledge in a way that we couldn't for the vast majority of the history of humans. It was like, we're not even close to done on delivering on that promise. So, and we're not close to done on delivering it with Medium, but that's what we're trying to do.
And on Medium, I took a couple of chapters of the book I was writing, put them up there, but it wasn't just publishing. All of a sudden, people were putting their own notes, and then I could accept those notes, and they'd get incorporated. It would seem to me that we could evolve to a model where instead of somebody like myself publishing a book, I could put a book out there, and it continually gets better and better. Is that something we're going to get to?
Absolutely. Your next book, we're going to do on Medium. We're going to do it like that. Yeah, that's part of the idea. And we don't have all those systems and all the right mechanisms yet. Medium's still a work in progress, but that is exactly the type of thing I mean when I say we haven't evolved beyond print. These are just bits, and we neither take advantage of the fact that they can be improved and updated, or the fact that even a simple thing, we have a feature that highlighting on Medium, that if you guys have read Kindle books, you know how you can highlight things, which and then you can see if a lot of people have highlighted something. On Medium, if you read a Medium article, and I always wanted the ability to see what someone smarter than me had thought about something I'm reading, and you read things on the internet every day that people smarter than you have read, and you have no idea what they thought about them. Maybe there's something in the comments, but that's usually the signal noise is low enough there that you don't bother. And so Medium, we added this little feature called highlighting, so you can see even a single person, if Walter has highlighted this sentence, that immediately becomes more valuable and meaningful for you. It can also be a jumping off point to a conversation or a footnote or a deeper dive into that particular idea. And that's where we're really starting to tap into the knowledge and wisdom in the network that we don't have that yet.
Wikipedia sort of movement
Right.
to crowdsource the wisdom. We're about to go to questions. I'll just ask one more, so be prepared. Which is, for that to work totally, where you crowdsource in a way the wisdom and it gets part of a book, it would seem to me it would be useful to allocate payment somehow. I mean, some people may write just for the fun of it, but some people write to put their kids through college.
Right.
Is there a future in which writers get paid, especially in a collaborative medium?
Absolutely. And the way I think about that is people write with different motivations and different types of writing. Absolutely, some of it deserves to be paid and should be paid, and some can demand to be paid. And we support that, and there is tremendous amount of valuable insights and knowledge from people who want to share it in order to have influence and make people think, and both should and can exist on the same system. And so I think people underestimate how much valuable stuff there is from people who will write and share that knowledge for reasons other than directly monetizing it. And I think there's the people who write books, especially, which can take years and incredible amounts of work. We can't get that for free, and that should be paid for. And so much more value could be unlocked, both for the creator and the consumer and the world, if we can find different ways to tap that knowledge, meaning pull it out of its isolated form that's in books. And because people do that for lots of reasons. I love books, but they silo knowledge and information in a way that it wouldn't have to be. If we could answer the money question, I think we could free up a lot of that stuff to have it do a lot more good.
Right. Let me open it up, if I may. Yes, and just shout, but the microphone will be there by the time you finish shouting. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, that's right. We'll get you the microphone. Or beer,
Did
whichever
you do the coding yourself at the beginning?
Did you do the coding yourself? Yes.
I did for Blogger. I coded that, not by myself, but I was the main coder of Blogger. When I got to Google, they didn't let me code anymore, because because I wasn't Google quality. I'm very self-taught, and so I didn't study computer science. I just figured out how to do it, and so I got to Google, and I checked in one bit of code, and it caused a security hole on Google, and they're like, all right, we're gonna cut you off. But then I did a little bit at Odeo, which was the company that Twitter spun out of, and I did a little bit at Twitter, and I haven't since. I haven't coded any of Medium, unfortunately.
But one of the cool things is that in Clarks, Nebraska, you're taught coding in high school. What's astonishing to me is that we don't make it so that every kid learns coding.
It's crazy. And it was mandatory in Clarks, Nebraska in 1980, whatever it was.
Amazing.
My son has a
Hashtag climate change.
climate change. How effective or influential is that in the world?
Hashtags are a really cool hack. Just speaking of things that the users decided to do on Twitter that we would have never anticipated. And so anyone can make one up at any time and attach it to a tweet. And of course, hashtags are now in other systems as well. They're a useful tool for organizing information. They don't do anything by themselves. I mean, no one's, people could click on that hashtag if it's attached to a tweet and see other people or other tweets that are related to that. And usually, if they're more specific and of the moment, is when they can catch on, and ad campaigns use them, and memes develop around them, and jokes develop around them. But frankly, I think they're actually getting less used over time. I don't see as many, other than for marketers, I don't see as many people doing them, at least on Twitter. I think on Instagram they're very big as well. So, yeah.
But didn't Black Lives Matter actually become a meme because of a hashtag?
Probably. Yeah, I don't know the whole history of that, but yeah. A lot of important things have. I mean, certainly in a lot of the Arab Spring things, where it's a way to join in the conversation outside of the social graph, really. That's the power of it. And so if the social graph, meaning I follow the people I know and therefore I hear from the people I know, the hashtag actually allows people to break that boundary. So with climate change, then you can see, what do other people who care about? I want to opt into that conversation, even if I don't know those people, or Black Lives Matter, whatever it is. And I can see the whole, and now with Twitter search, which is instantaneous, you could see at any given time everybody talking about a thing, which is powerful and a very important complement to the graph.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. What's the magic of 140 characters?
Classic question. So when I mentioned SMS before, text messages was our first target for Twitter. And at the time, most phones and carriers limited text messages to 160 characters. And because SMS was really a hack over the cellular networks, and it only allowed for 160 characters. And so in the very beginning, there wasn't a limit on tweets, even on the web or via SMS, and we would send multiple messages, but then that got very confusing because you didn't know which one was connected to the other. And then also, if you had a shorter username, you could have more characters. So we just decided to standardize it, leave it 140, so it'd be the username, colon, and the space, and the characters. And that quickly became obsolete, but it was one of those things that was sort of a happy accident, because obviously that constraint drove, in the best case, the conciseness was very powerful, and it accentuated the real-time nature of it, because tweets could be created and consumed so quickly because they're short.
When I was younger, sociological differences and issues between parents and children would be related to issues that were going on in the world, like the Vietnam War, or how we felt about this versus that. And it seems increasingly today that fluency with methods of communication are now becoming the major wedge. I blog, and I have a grandchild, and my 80-year-old mother, who is allergic to computers, can't see pictures of her grandchildren or read my blogs. And it has created a gulf and an issue within the family. So since I don't know enough to ask you a technological question, I wanted to ask you a question about if you've done any thinking or have any thoughts about the sociological and family dynamic implications of a lot of what you're doing.
That's super interesting. I come from utopian San Francisco, where we think we're solving all the sociological problems with these tools, not creating them. We're not all that naive, but I come from the Midwest, and I don't see my family very much, and my parents are not computer whizzes, but they definitely see more pictures of their grandkids because of these systems than they would otherwise, and that's obviously very common, but that's not going to be universal, and it's not going to be black and white. So I'm curious. You have thoughts on that, Walter?
I think the bigger problem is not a generational divide in technology. I think my dad's turning 90 and he's pretty good at, he doesn't blog, but he tweets, he emails, he text messages. I think we're developing, which is far more problematic, a socioeconomic divide where technology could have shrunk the inequality of opportunity, but now it seems to be widening it. And I don't know if you had thoughts there, but.
Yeah, I'm not a researcher, so I don't know. I can't speak with authority on that. It's probably worse than we think, that inequality, and it's something specifically on Medium that we're thinking deeply about, because I think there's this illusion that the internet gave everyone a level playing field to have a voice and have influence, and it's not that simple. If you're connected and your social network is a social network of influencers, and then you obviously have you start with a much higher platform. And so what we're trying to do with Medium, and I can't say we've necessarily cracked this, is really make it so if you can put thoughts into the system, if they have value and they resonate, they will be found, and they will find the right people. Obviously, you can juice that if you are also connected, but we're trying to still level it out a little bit more than it is today.
And I think one way you're doing it is pretty old-fashioned, with people like Kate Lee and others who are real editors, real people, and say, let me help elevate this voice.
Yeah, and they do that with, we try to do that based on the merits of the content. And we do it for when famous people write on Medium, we make sure that they're known because people find them interesting, but we don't discriminate, and we say, here's something that actually is incredibly worthwhile, and we have human editors and curators who will at least help it get an audience, and we also do manual things. Like we wanted to move thinking forward around the on-demand economy, which is shifting the economics of a lot of sectors and moving a lot of workers to 1099 jobs from W-2 jobs, and all the implications of that large force. We said, well, let's explore this topic, and to do so, let's get many voices. Let's get not just the entrepreneurs of these companies, not just journalists who are commenting on it, but let's get that driver who's driving full time now for Uber and Lyft, and get them to tell their experience. Or someone who was, I read this story from a woman who worked for Google Express for like 3 weeks, and she told how she got the job and the experience. And that we sought out those voices, and we elevated them on the platform. And I think for everybody who saw those multiple perspectives, it gave you a much deeper understanding of this phenomenon and how it's shaping economic lives for people up and down the spectrum.
And that is almost true of freelance now, where I didn't, when I was growing up, you needed to join a big company like Time Inc. Now with Medium, everybody can be part of a gig economy, but it would be especially true if we found better payment systems for it. And that's true of all the gig economy. I worry about that. It could exacerbate the divide. Yes, there are three in the way back. Let's start on the aisle and move in to save the legs of our mic runners.
Thanks so much. I was wondering if you could say, when you were growing up in Nebraska, what leaders most influenced you, and how is that different today? What leaders do you look at and think can make the biggest difference in the world?
Leaders in Nebraska when I was growing up included Tom Osborne. Anyone know who that is?
Football coach.
Yeah. Huskers. And
How many Huskers games did you actually go to?
like 3 or 4. I went to the University of Nebraska though for a year and a half, and so I was there. And most of my inspiration and leaders came through reading, and so I read probably 2 or 3 books about Bill Gates. He was probably the number one model for me growing up as an entrepreneur, and later Warren Buffett, to mention a Nebraskan who I still find very inspiring.
Why?
Because he's a deep thinker and a long-term thinker and a contrarian thinker, and Nebraskan.
That's redundant. Yeah.
Thanks. You've talked about designing for publication and dissemination. And then you talked about designing. You realized the opportunity to design for community support. What would be your ideas about how you would design to support empathy? It's a counter to the fractious and argumentative atmosphere. If you could design in the empathy tools and interfaces, you could promote a higher degree of empathy, which I think would promote deliberation,
For sure.
and conflict resolution, etc.
I first of all, I'm open to ideas about that, but I think it's an awesome question, because one of our challenges is we want anyone who's so inclined to share their ideas and perspectives, and the internet has gotten, for many people, sort of a dangerous place to put yourself out there, which is kind of sad, because we can't learn from each other if we're not able to speak, or if we thought every thought we had needed to be super polished and defensible and backed up in order to put it out there and add to a conversation. And if you're not willing to be wrong, if you're not willing to learn, if it's too dangerous to put yourself out there, then that's going to have a paralyzing effect on helping us all learn. And so the idea of when you're reading something on the internet, or you're seeing the thoughts of another human, that there is actually a human there, and that we have these feedback mechanisms and all these systems in order to, when you're designing these systems, what you're hoping for is that people who do things get positive feedback that causes them to do more of those things. But those same feedback mechanisms can have a negative effect. And so we've, even back in Twitter days, we thought about, well, what's the ideal? We thought about, what if instead of a fave, or fave on Twitter is or a like on Facebook, what's a different word? How might, if we change the word for showing approval or a positive inclination on something, would that change how people thought about it? So a like is sort of like, I just want people to like me, or a fave, that's kind of superlative, and it's is it really my favorite tweet? I'm not sure. But what if it was thanks? Would that encourage people more? Yeah, exactly. And so we've thought about that. And on Medium, the word is recommend, because we're trying to get people to say, actually, I don't just like this, but I recommend other people read it, which doesn't really address your point, but is something I've thought about. And we've tried to develop systems that encourage highlighting. Is another mechanism that gives positive feedback, and it's hard to give negative feedback with a highlight, but it doesn't necessarily drive empathy. So I would love to figure that out.
But you do, on Medium, have promoted civil discourse better than blogging and even tweeting has done. Yeah. And so it has progressed.
Yeah, we're trying to.
I think it's because of the collaborative nature. And I think there was somebody, yeah, go ahead.
2 statistical questions. One is, what are the general demographics of the tweeters out there? And secondly, it may be more difficult to answer, but what is the general proportion of those, of the volume of just the narcissistic, I'm eating a taco, versus learning, educational, and value-add tweeting?
I wish I had really current data on either of those. I can tell you there's, I think the last public number we reported is somewhere in the range of 300 million active Twitter users. And the majority of those are outside the United States. They're in every country you can imagine. And so therefore the demographics are also all over the place. And there's many, many different, Twitter is one of those things that people have incredibly different experiences. There's millions of teenagers in the US who use Twitter pseudonymously, but in order to have just to chat with each other. And they use it instead of Facebook because their parents and grandparents are on Facebook. And so that's one demographic that has a very specific use case, and they only follow each other, and it's for pure social interaction. And then there's, journalists, basically every journalist in the world is on Twitter, and they use it every day for their work, and they use it for news and information and for spreading information. And so it's hard to summarize that, and unfortunately I don't really have any data about it. A tremendous amount of Twitter, though, has been optimized over time for sharing of information rather than just the social information. I make a distinction between sort of what I call social media. The purest definition of social media, in my opinion, is that which is only relevant or interesting dependent on your relationship with the creator. So if someone had a baby, that's incredibly important news if they're a good friend or a relative of yours. If they're not, or like maybe they're a celebrity and you're a fan. Otherwise, the news is someone in the world had a baby. But lots of other information can be of value whether or not you know the person sharing it. And so what we decided, although we started out with the status update thing, what we decided on Twitter a long time ago was this: we see tons of value in the less social information. So that's why on Twitter from day one, it was you could follow someone. It wasn't I'm their friend. I may not know them, but I value what they have to say, and I want to hear what they have to say. And it could be a media outlet, and it could be broadcast, and that's very different than just creating something that's optimized for baby pictures. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yes. All right, last question right there, sir.
Thank you for all the great products you brought to the country and the rest of the world. I'm concerned about offshore cybersecurity. We're having this wonderful modern day Gutenberg press, and it's wonderful. Is it something that is valid that we should be worried about this, and what should we be doing about it? Thank you.
We should be worried about cybersecurity. To some extent. I'm not an expert on this subject, but our systems, for the most part, are highly insecure. And the biggest thing I could recommend for anyone in this room is to just check your own systems and Google like how to use safe passwords and there's basic steps you can go through to make your own situation much safer. Which is part of what you may be asking about. The other part, in terms of our government and our banks and that which we have no control over, may be less useful to be worried about that because we can't personally do anything about that. But the systems are frail and they're vulnerable, obviously, and we see this practically every day in the headlines. But the practical wisdom I could offer is to definitely lock down your own situation by having strong passwords, by following best practices, by if you use systems that offer two-factor authentication, use that, figure out what it is. It's a little bit more work, but getting hacked sucks.
Yeah. And finally, my final question, with Obvious, which is your sort of umbrella investing and thinking company, you're actually trying to invest, and you even have a phrase for it, that's not just for the bottom line good, but to improve things. Explain what that is in the phrase you
Okay,
use.
so right, so I have a venture fund with some partners called Obvious Ventures, and the motivation for that was I've spent the vast majority of my time building Medium. I'm super fortunate that I have more money than I do time, and I want to make more things happen in the world. So the question was, how do I use that money? So I had angel invested, like a lot of people. It was like someone asked me, and seems like a reasonable idea. I was sure I'll put some money in the thing, but I wasn't very good at that, and meaning I didn't spend any time on it, and it's limited in how much you can do. So, but my motivation always, and my rule for angel investing was not will this make money, because that wasn't the primary point. The hope was it would make money, but what I looked at everything at was through the lens of, if this succeeds greatly, would I be happy if this was hugely successful, even if I didn't profit from it? Which is an incredibly clarifying question, because you can look at a lot of things that are either, well, maybe there's the extreme examples that are easy, like a tobacco company is like, no, I wouldn't be thrilled, and so that's clarifying. But most things kind of fall in the middle. So there's a lot of enterprise software that is great and makes people more productive and whatever, but it doesn't really, I don't care whether or not it succeeds
making
in
the
world.
world a better place.
Yeah, but there's a whole set of things that I think if they're successful, we can really feel good about them. So let's just filter everything with that lens and still try to invest in things that are going to make money. In fact, they have a huge potential to make money if they address huge problems that we have as a society, which we have in security or food or health or climate and sustainability. And let's find the intersection between those things that seem like good solutions to major problems, and that we can arguably argue we're actually going to do some good. And so we call it world positive investing. And so it's a venture fund that is now about 6 months old, and that's how we go about it.
And what are you looking at that would be world positive?
So we have a bunch of things from, we're about to make a solar investment, which I can't offer the name of, but there's a bunch of things happen. Solar has reached a tipping point where it can scale massively and actually significantly alter our energy usage. There's things in food that we've done, including alternatives to meat. There's a diamond company that we invest in that's super cool that actually manufactures diamonds. So they're way more sustainable. They don't involve enslaving anyone, and they're actually created with renewable energy. And so stuff like that. It's all across the board. It's internet and tech things as well as offline stuff, and it's usually some technology driving it, but not necessarily a software thing.
Well, Ev, thanks for what you've done, what you're doing, and what you're gonna do. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.